Welcome, this is Najma Minhas. I'm Moeed Pirzada with Global Village Space. We're looking at the continuing crisis between Russia and Ukraine. Today is day 6 of this intractable situation. We hear that a large Russian convoy, 40-mile long, is headed towards Kiev. The United Nations General Assembly is holding a special session after 40 years, in which the Ukrainian ambassador to the UN made an emotional speech where he asked the world to help to save his country. Right now, currently, the EU Parliament is also holding a special session, which is being addressed by the Ukrainian President Zelensky. With what's going on and what's happening right now?
Najma, thank you so much. I generally don't like saying next 48 hours is very important because Pakistani media, television anchors and programs have done this phrase to death since 2008 when they started predicting that, something big is going to happen in end December. The next few weeks are very important. Sheikh Rashid is known for making these kind of comments. But however I may hate this phraseology, I have to say the next 48 to 72 hours are very important for the global balance of power. These 48 to 72 hours will determine the fate of United States' overall impact, its power projection within Europe. It will determine the fate of President Putin and Russia. It will determine the fate of the strategic equation between China and Russia. India and other countries like Turkey, India, Iran, the East Asia, all of these countries, important countries, the African continent, especially the Europeans, the French, the Germans and the Italians, they're all looking very carefully at the outcome of this conflict, which is shaping place outside the capital city of Ukraine, Kiyv, where, as you have mentioned in the outset, are 40 miles long, according to satellite imagery. And I'm trying to imagine that what is there, what kind of firepower is there in this 40 miles long military convoy. This is the proper invasion expedition. So what reached on last Thursday on the outskirts of Kyiv was probably just the initial exploratory Russian military units which were lightly armed. They were trying to test the defenses, and as they would have already known that the defenses are packed with a guerrilla action, the Ukrainian defense, which I think has been beefed up extremely intelligently by the Americans over the past several years, they intend to basically bog down this Russian military into an urban conflict, which is very difficult for a traditional military. So if we have learned all this in the past 6 days, I've been reading almost everything that has been published in the past several weeks and months, then of course President Putin, the Russian establishment, the Russian military, I think Sergei Shoigu is their defense minister, who's rated very highly. There is a foreign affairs piece about him, that how he has modernized the Russian military, and how he has increased their effectiveness, and how that effectiveness was displayed in conflict with Georgia in 2008, how this was displayed in Syria, and how this was displayed once again in 2014 in Crimea on the issue of Sevastopol. So this is the decisive moment. If you ask more, I'll explain to you.
I mean, if this is such a decisive moment, then why did it take Russia such a long time to come inside Ukraine?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. In fact, just about less than 24 hours earlier, there has been a very interesting and provocative piece and analysis that has been published by New York Times. And I was very surprised because almost 90% plus all the content is propaganda, which is publishing against demonizing Russia, demonizing the Putin, crying hoarse about the whole thing. I mean, every major publication of the Western world on both sides of the Atlantic is doing the same. But there was a brilliant piece. The title of the piece is "After a Fabled Start, Russian Forces Hit Harder in Ukraine." And this is by Stephen Erlanger. I think I once met Stephen Erlanger. I think he's the diplomatic correspondent in Europe. He's probably written this piece from Brussels, and I think we probably met him at one point at the Salzburg Forum when he was probably attending that several years ago. So this piece basically analyzes, and this piece actually talks to several retired US military generals, the 3-star, the 4-star generals, very senior generals. And this analyzes the initial lackluster performance in the around Kyiv by the Russian military in the last 5 days. And this piece then explains the Russian military. This can happen to any military. The logistical problems when they go on to to an expedition like this, there can be logistical problems. And then this piece analyzes that they had these kind of problems in the fight with Georgia, in Syria, also on the Crimea initial issue. But they are capable, and let's not forget, that in this world, there are only two real military machines of this capability. One is the United States and Pentagon, which is, of course, I think more superior, more sophisticated. And the second is the Russian military machine. There is no other third military machine that has this kind of capability, this kind of firepower, and this kind of ability to reorganize itself. So what this piece argues, after a fumble start, Russian forces hit harder. Then now the Russian military looks very determined to do something serious around Kyiv. They look determined to take Kyiv or to make the Ukrainian government surrender. And this has to happen, I expect, within the next 48 hours.
Is this a change in military strategy that they've adopted?
I think this piece, when we had last discussion, I and you had the last discussion, and then I did an Urdu vlog on my other YouTube platform channel. I had argued this thing on my own understanding that Russians have several problems. One is that they are being painted as demons, and the whole international media or the so-called international community from Brussels to London to Washington to New York is against them. But they also have a problem in the sense that the Ukrainians are their historic kin and kith. We don't have to forget that the history, this is one of the major disputes, that Kievan Rus is the right term, Rus, which is now called in English as Russia. So Kievan Rus originated within Ukraine from this Kyiv area. So Ukrainians are not like Iraqis and Syrians to the invading army. So this Russian invading army doesn't have a racial grudge or a superiority-inferiority issue. So the Russian military doesn't look at the Ukrainians the way the invading Americans would look at Iraqis, or they looked at Syrians, or they look at the Libyans. There is no racial divide between them. They are the kin and kith, and their strategic goal is to fight it in such a way that they end up displacing the government, seeking a surrender, but they don't want to destroy the cities. And that is why in the last 6 days, 5 to 6 days, we have seen that while there have been claims of hospitals and schools and kindergartens and other private buildings and apartment complexes being attacked, we have very rarely seen any evidence apart from one apartment complex in Kyiv that was hit by an accidental stray rocket. Whether it was a Ukrainian rocket or it was a Russian rocket, we don't know. But that was the only real evidence, or some small evidence we have seen. So the Russian problem is this, that they want to go lenient. But now it looks that their prestige is at stake, Putin's political future is at stake, their equation with Europe is at stake, their equation with China is at stake, their equation with India is at stake, and they're going to probably hit very hard at Kyiv.
So the balance of power that you referred to, why did it take Putin such a long time to realize this, that there's a whole balance of power game being played here?
You see, he has been complaining. I took out time to read his recent speeches of 21st February and also 24th February, and then there were other speeches, other pronouncements, television interviews, his various statements. He has been complaining for the past several years, especially since 2014. So you can say that for at least past 8 years, he has been complaining that NATO's military presence, NATO's expansion to Russia's doorsteps, Russian borders are unacceptable. We have been betrayed, we have been deceived, that we were given these assurances in meetings between James Baker and Gorbachev in 1990. Probably it was 1990, if not 91, when the question of the German unification and Russia's permission was being sought for both united Germany, East and West Germany, to be together in NATO. And Russians gave that permission, and the undertaking that was given to them by James Baker was that NATO will not expand towards the Russian borders, and they will not, in the former Warsaw Pact in the Soviet Union areas. So he has been complaining on this, and his argument has always been this, that Russia has always been attacked from the West. Russia attacked East, it had been fighting against the Ottomans, it had been fighting in the steppes, but Russia never was successful, or it joined the British and the Austro-Hungarians in cornering Napoleon in the battles in Europe, but Russian as such have not invaded invaded the Western Europe. So he says that Russia is insecure, and he has been telling this. He's been very vocal about it. And his grievance was, and for the past several months and weeks, he was very, very vocal about it. And there is a very interesting piece which I found in New York Times that was published on 28th January 2022 by a Russian woman journalist who is extremely anti-Putin. And she had argued in that piece. If I can even find that piece, I want to basically give you the name of that piece so that we can actually show that on the screen. There's a very, very interesting piece in which she argues that Putin is caught. Yeah, here is a piece. She says that Putin is caught in a trap of his own making, January 28, 2022, by Yulina Latinina. What she basically argues is this: for the past 2 months, Vladimir Putin is raising a specter of war to pressurize NATO, United States, and the Europeans to submit to his demands and to give him guarantees that you would not extend NATO. But he has failed. She hates Putin. He has failed. The Europeans and the Americans have called his bluff. They've showed they're not afraid of him. And now either he has to do the humiliation of bringing his troops back and has to find an excuse to give to the Russian people about how he has failed, or he will do something. So if we take Yulina's argument, Putin is caught in a trap of his own making, I think the Americans, the Europeans, and the NATO powers did not give him the space to withdraw from his position. They didn't give him anything. So he is there around Kyiv now to get something serious out of.
So you've suggested there's a balance of power issue going on here. What about the other side of the equation? We've understood Russia's perspective, but what is the US, United States, or the European position in this balance of power?
We picture on the face of it, every article, every op-ed, every analysis that is being written in New York Times or Washington Post, or is appearing in BBC, or is appearing in CNN, and the tweets that are coming from important American decision makers, senators and congressmen and analysts, they're all claiming that the United States has actually displayed its great ability to keep its alliance together. All Europe and everyone is actually standing together. I mean, look at the evidences. I mean, for the first time, violating their own constitution and conventions, the Germans have decided to supply 500 Stinger missiles and other missiles and anti-tank weapons to Ukraine. And so is perhaps France and so many other European countries. Almost 30 countries have decided to either give the military supply or to give financial help. And European Union has decided to reimburse countries which are on the border of Ukraine, like Poland.
Helmets and jackets, 450 million euros.
450 million. I mean, this is unprecedented. The European Union, that had a principal position against war for the past 30 years, at least 25, 30 years, has decided to reimburse. A country like Switzerland that remained neutral in Second World War and had always prided itself and taken huge pride that Switzerland is neutral in Second World War. Just imagine, during the 6 years of Second World War, it remained neutral on its borders, has actually decided that it's not neutral in this conflict, and has banned the Russian Air Force, Russian planes from its territory. And every European country has not only imposed the banking sanction, they've thrown Russia's key institutions away from SWIFT messenger system for financial. The flights are banned, the sport events are banned, the cultural events are banned, the football events, everything is banned. So why it is happening? On the face of it, the media, the CNN, BBC, which are busy 90% of the time in doing blatant propaganda, they make the American people, the European people, everybody in the world believe this thing, that this is happening because there is an organic, genuine, immediate anger and reaction. So the media and the social media, the Twitter and the Facebook, especially Twitter, is being used and to create this impression. At the same time, all Russian sources have been taken off. For instance, the only television channel they had, the only the powerful website they had was RT. It was in any case no match for CNN and BBC, but it has been taken off across major European countries. And even in Britain, there have been 15 cases of instances that are being studied against the Russian TV, the RT. So Russians have no voice, right? And there is so much of pressure to maintain uniformity. This is I wanted to explain. Yet, why there is so much pressure to maintain the uniformity? Because many in Europe, the Germans and the French and the Italians, who are compelled to take this very strong position at this moment, do not necessarily see to this conflict eye to eye along with the Americans. because it is the American power which is sitting in European theater for the past almost, 70 plus years, starting from 1945, 55 and 20. So 75 years, the American power is holding Europe in the name of a collective security system. And when you look at in the last several days, the German Chancellor and then the French President, Emmanuel Macron, have visited Moscow to meet Putin. And just yesterday, when the Ukraine-Russia talks were taking place at the border of Belarus and Ukraine, at that time, President Emmanuel Macron had a detailed telephonic discussion with Putin, in which Putin again told him that, look, my demands are, I want denazifications, I want demilitarization, I want the acceptance and legitimacy for the Donbass region, and perhaps also the NATO, the expansion of the NATO is not expected. So the Germans, the French, and the Italians, if you look at the past few weeks, are not necessarily on the same page. They are looking towards something different, and they have geo-economic interest tied with Russia. And the outgoing, very important German chancellor, one of the most often billed as one of the most important European politician of the contemporary period, Angela Merkel, had spent huge amount of political capital and effort in the past 15 years of her political career as Chancellor of Germany to forge a closer geo-economic relationship with Russia. So this closer geo-economic relationship and interdependence of Europe on Russian energy and gas is unacceptable to American strategic thinkers, because that means the American influence will wane. You see, Russia, and if I would say in a rather more stronger way, that they have brought Russia to a position where Russia has done an irresponsible act of actually invading Ukraine. But then can be counter-argument is this, that this is what the Americans wanted. Now it depends upon how Putin and his military are going to handle the situation around Kyiv in the next 48 to 72 hours. Are they going to destroy Kyiv? Do they have something up the sleeve? Are they going to walk into the trap of a guerrilla warfare, a city-urban warfare, where private contractors, trained guerrillas are ready, waiting for them, or they have something up the sleeve which we don't understand?
In this balance of power, how does China, India, Turkey, Iran, where do they all fit in?
As we speak, I think the vote in the General Assembly is due, where I think the total members are 193, and United States, it is a resolution or a declaration moved by United States. It needs 2/3 of the majority, which actually makes it, I think, 66% of the vote, which will make it to 127 or 128 countries have to vote for this resolution. The last when I was looked and checked, United States legal team was working very hard to dilute the language of this resolution so that more and more countries can be persuaded to vote on this declaration. Now, what does this resolution say if it is adopted? The resolution says that Russia should declare a ceasefire and withdraw its forces immediately. Now, General Assembly resolutions do not have a legal binding, unlike the United Nations Security Council, where 5 permanent members, including United States, Russia, UK, and France, and China, have the veto power. And there, last week, Russia exercised its right of veto, and more or less it was the same resolution which is being brought to the United Nations General Assembly. But the difference is that now in the General Assembly, the resolution is being watered down because Americans are worried that important countries like India, well, of course, China will probably abstain, and many other countries might abstain. I think Pakistan is going to abstain. But the question is, in India, an important strategic ally of United States, multi-level relationship, 1 billion people are in India. This is a very important country. How is India going to vote? Is India going to vote for the resolution, asking Russia to withdraw at this time? Highly unlikely. So, and there are so many other countries in Africa, in Asia, and other places which have to be brought. So if United States has to get at least 128 votes to be able to produce a moral pressure, there's not a legal pressure, a moral pressure. So everyone is watching. China is watching because China, whereas it hasn't really supported the invasion, it hasn't basically said that this is the right thing, because in the Chinese foreign policy and philosophy, the issue of the sovereignty of a nation state is crucial. You know that. Whenever we have met the the Chinese diplomats or their thinkers which come, or their intellectuals and writers, they always emphasize that non-interference in another country's affairs and maintaining the national sovereignty is a crucial cardinal principle. So maintaining that and basically saying that we don't like this, they have gone on front foot, the Chinese deputy foreign minister, the Chinese media, the Chinese government, and they have blamed NATO for the situation around Ukraine. But now Chinese are also looking at this. If Russians handle that well in the next 48 to 72 hours, it will strengthen the Chinese and the Russian equation. There is a brilliant piece which I found in Foreign Affairs, which was written only a few days ago, I think towards the third week or fourth week of February, by Professor Hall Brands, who teaches at the South at SAIS, which is at John Hopkins, right, a School of International Affairs. And the piece title was that the Eurasian Nightmare. And in this piece, Professor Hall Brands, who has written extensively on the issue of the Caucasus and Russia and Eurasia, he basically says that now United States power, its global order, is being impinged and is facing challenge from both sides. In the European side of the Eurasian landmass, there is an assertive Russia under Putin that is challenging the United States. Domination is questioning it. On the other hand is the economic rise of the China, which is less bellicose, but is also challenging the United States on the eastern side, on the Eurasian landmass. And whosoever dominates the Eurasian landmass throughout the human history for the past 3,000 years, any major power that has to be the real power, like Rome, like the Ottoman Empire, has to dominate and control the Eurasian landmass. United States controls and dominates the Eurasian landmass. It has forces stationed in Germany and other places because of the collective security concept. And that is how the NATO has been expanded from 12 initial members in 1949 to 30 members this time. This is what Russia is trying to stop. If he manages to basically send the message across that we would not let NATO expand further towards us, and the Ukraine has to be denatified and whatever, or maybe brings a regime change, then United States global order prestige gets a serious reversal. And this is where China is looking at, and this is where India is looking at. India has to make very important calculations, India is looking at also the ability of the Russian army to fight. I mean, the Indians have created, I think the Indian establishment, to my understanding, has created a brilliant English television channel. Something like this we cannot even imagine in Pakistan. Beyond World is One. And if you look at the programs, they are perhaps giving a very, very accurate description of this war. And yesterday, I think Sharma Palik, she was actually saying that India also has to see why the Russian military is stuck around Kyiv, because India's, the large percentage of the Indian armament is still basically Russian. They make planes and everything. So India is also looking at it, the fighting ability, to what effectiveness the Russian military in the next 24 to 48 hours is going to deploy its armament, how they're going to take the city and what they're going to do.
So, okay, I'd also like to ask you, the Ukrainian president has asked for an expedited track onto EU membership. What is the likelihood of that? And what do the Turks feel about it, more importantly?
The interesting thing is this, that President Zelensky, the comedian turned into the president of Ukraine, that was actually used to play the role of a president in a comedy show, and is now the president, and actually did the signing of the application to join the European Union, and then made a very impassioned speech about it at the time when his team were actually in talks with the Russian delegation in Belarus at the border, right? It was 6-7 hours long discussion, and he was making these kind of appeals. That actually shows that how serious President Zelensky is. And if I'm forgiven for saying this thing, because the way the Western media operates, it is very easy to basically say that the Viktor Lukashenko, or someone who was the president in 2004, and then again between 2010 to 2014, was a Russian puppet, and this was a Russian-controlled government. But if we actually say that Zelensky is basically an American and Western puppet, who they cultivated and brought him here, I don't think Zelensky has a mind of his own. I think there's a lot of disinformation going on when they say that the Americans had offered Zelensky that you should run away and we're going to give you security. I think everything which Zelensky is doing from Kyiv is actually scripted. He's being advised. For instance, while the talks were taking place, I mean, what person in his right mind, if they're really serious about the talks with the Russians who are breathing onto you, you go on on television and you basically say that we want admission into European Union.
So he deliberately torpedoed.
He deliberately. I mean, then he says we want We want military cover, just like the kind of cover that was actually provided against Libya, Muammar Gaddafi's regime. He says over Western Ukraine, the West and the NATO should provide an air cover, an air corridor, or basically an air restriction, which is called as, so that Russians cannot fly in that area. I mean, what he's talking of? I mean, this is something that happened in Libya, against which China and Russia subsequently took position in Syria. And then the position, which has been variously expressed by both countries, was this, that we were fooled over Libya. Putin has been continuously saying that we were cheated over Libya. A resolution, a United Nations Security Council, restriction was brought, an embargo was brought on Libyan Air Force, and then they used that United Nations Security Council, which we didn't veto. We cooperated with them. I mean, this is in his speech on 24th. So Zelensky is doing everything possible to torpedo, to destroy the possibility of not having a peace, because I think he's not a man of his own self, and he's continuously taking dictation from somewhere to do whatever he's doing.
Well, I think the United Kingdom Prime Minister Boris Johnson has already said that they could not provide a military air cover. That would be taking the war to another level.
And the European Union has said that there's no possibility of Ukraine being admitted.
But what about Turkey? I mean, Turkey's been relatively silent on this issue so far in the last 6 days.
The latest decision which the Turkish government took in the last 24 hours is that they have actually banned the entry of the Russian naval ships through the Bosphorus and Dardanelles into the Black Sea. They had an agreement, I think it's a Montreux agreement, along with the Russians. They could not stop it, but now they have found some sort of clause by saying that if active hostilities break out, or if some naval ships are not registered at the ports inside the Black Sea, then they will not give them. I think Turkey is in a very strange situation, because if you look at the past 300, 400 years, the Ottoman Empire was always pitched against the Tsarist and against the Russia. It's the same Russia. In the middle of the 19th century, the English have actually gone in the battle. Where have they gone? They've gone to fight the battle, the war of the Crimea, I think, and the Florence Nightingale, the English nurse that became a legendary character, was during the war in the Crimea, in which the English, despite the fact that the English public hated the Turks, they thought the Turks were infidels, and Lord Byron, who was actually a very famous poet, in English history, died while fighting against the Turks, while crossing a ravine or a river against. Such was the feeling in England against Turkey, yet such was the nature of the strategic conflict and its importance between Ottomans and the Russian Tsars, that English sent their forces, and hundreds and thousands of people of the English troops, actually thousands and thousands of them, died in the conflict. So the point is this, that Turkey and Russia have always a very difficult, tense relationship. And this relationship became more tense during the conflict on Syria, where Turkey had its own territorial interest and strategic interest, and Russia came in to save the Bashar al-Assad. And we know that Bashar al-Assad is someone Erdogan hates very badly. So in recent years, Turkish president had improved his relationship with Russia, especially after he's almost convinced that the military coup against him that happened several years ago was totally an American-sponsored coup. And everyone in the Turkish establishment, not only Erdogan, but also his opposition, are convinced that this was actually a coup in which the American base was actually used. So ever since, the relationship between Turkey and the United States was worsening. Now, on one hand, it had a difficult relationship with Russia, which it wanted to improve. It also had a relationship with Ukraine. I think Erdogan also visited Ukraine, and he was continuously on telephone with President Zelensky. It is also a NATO member. It has to maintain its presence over there. Turkey is needed by Russians. Turkey is needed by the Americans. Turkey wants to have its image in the world as well. So Turkey is very carefully looking at the situation. What we call in Urdu is कि ऊंट किस करवट बैठता है. How this situation is going to shape is very, very important for Turkey.
And what about Iran? I mean, they're in the midst of talks on the JCPOA as well right now.
Very interesting question. So there are two sides to the Iran thing. First, they came up a few days ago, and they basically said that NATO is responsible for all the chaos around Ukraine, and this is their normal standard rhetoric. But then they contained their rhetoric, and some of the observers who were not Iranians, but who are part of the JCPOA, they are watching that, they told me that the French and the Germans and the Italians and the other powers who are right now in a European city where this is taking place, perhaps in Brussels or Hague, they have appreciated the way the Iranians have conducted on the Ukraine crisis. They have taken a position. They're not against Russia, but they have also not used their usual fiery rhetoric. The reason is this, that Iranians are expecting that their engagement, courtesy with the help of the Germans and the French, with the Biden administration, is going well. Biden himself always thought that the sanctions against Iran, the abrogation, the sudden abrogation of the US-Iran nuclear deal by the Trump administration, this was never to the liking of President Biden, who had played a very important role for 8 years under the Obama administration in bringing the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, which is called as the Iran and US nuclear deal. So Iran is expecting that within the next few days to weeks, within the first few weeks, most of the sanctions on Iran will go away. So Iran is basically looking very carefully. However, and is being appreciated by the Europeans for that, who are also watching the outcome of the conflict. But Imam Khamenei has issued a very strong denunciation just today of the American actions and blamed the Americans for everything that is going wrong in Ukraine, and said Russians had no other option but to defend themselves. Now let's see what happens in the General Assembly. So how many countries really vote and how many countries abstain?
Moeed, thank you for sharing your thoughts with us today.